more you listen, the more you know. This is Good Politics with Dr. Wilson and Adam Whiteman.
Welcome back. It's Season 3 of Good Politics, here with Adam Whiteman and Dr. Wilson.
Hey, Adam, I wanted to mention something. You know, on this show, we have this format that we do where I talk, and then you talk, and then we play a clip, and it's circular. The one thing I wanted to say is people probably wonder, where do we get these media clips from? Yeah, I get them from anywhere that I can. And so what that means is if faculty here have some media, something that they've presented on, or even a response to anything that we've done, if they send those files to me, we can maybe put some faculty on that way. And it's just something to consider.
All right, and so that would be any clip, any type of media, really.
Right. So if there's a video they have of a conference presentation, or if they have a media clip, maybe they've been on television, or if they simply just sit down and dictate something and record a reply to something, maybe they disagree with us, then when you and I talk, we can refer to that and play it. I mean, it's...
Wow, yeah. I mean, I really look forward to some responses. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
All right. What are we getting into this week, Dr. Wilson?
Here's what I want to do. There's a lot of talk right now about the president and who's got the war power. And we're going to talk a little bit about the law of military conflict in the United States. And we're going to talk principally at the level of the Constitution. And to start us off, play clip number 1.
What do you make of the president's order to take out Soleimani?
This was very clearly an act of war by this president without any kind of authorization or declaration of war from Congress, clearly violating the Constitution.
This violates the Constitution? That's pretty steep. Why and how? And is this true?
Well, no, it's not true. There is this grade school understanding that's out there that suggests that in the United States Constitution, only the Congress has the war power. You know, like if you're going to do an active war, you've got to go get the declaration of war in front of Congress. That's a grade school understanding, and it's actually not true. Now, I know viewers may be saying, what do you mean it's not true? Actually, let me do it this way. It's only partially true, all right? The truth is that in the United States Constitution, the president has some inherent shooting power. The Constitution, when it was originally written, said that Congress would have the power to make war, and they changed it to declare war. And the reason why they changed that sentence is they thought that the president should have some inherent shooting power. For example, for self-defense. If somebody's shooting at you, you have to be able to shoot back. There's also the issue of preemption. If someone's coming in to attack you and there's going to be attack tomorrow, you don't have to wait to be hit. You can do preemption. And there's been so many examples in American history where presidents have used their shooting power without actually having a declaration of war. In fact, that's normally the way it works. Let me give you a few examples. Jefferson and the Barbary Pirates. You had these North African pirates who were attacking shipping vessels. Now, what they wanted was money paid to them. It would be like paying protection money. You know, like they're saying, I have the ability to hit these ships, and unless you give me a cut of what you're selling, then I'm going to hit them. And so the question is whether for public policy purposes you'd buy them off or start shooting back.
Early extortion.
Exactly.
Sink your ship, you pay us.
Exactly.
How did Jefferson respond?
Well, Jefferson thought that he could only respond by getting a declaration of war. But Hamilton says back to him something interesting. Hamilton says, look, when someone's shooting at you, a state of war therefore exists, and you don't need to go get the declaration. You can just shoot back. There's two concepts there that are rather interesting. One is self-defense. When someone's shooting at you, you can shoot back. The other concept is what a declaration is. It seems to me what a declaration of war is something only that declares the nation's mental state, the mental state of the nation, the intention of the nation with regard to hostilities. And that's rather interesting because some people seem to think that the power to declare war is the power to make war, and there's this distinction that's not exactly the same. There's other examples, too. In 1817, President Monroe invaded Florida, which was owned at that time by Spain, and he did so chasing the Seminole tribe. The Seminoles were attacking and retreating into Florida, and instead of putting up with that, the United States basically invaded Florida and eventually ended up taking it. So there's this concept that emerges in constitutional law between defensive shooting, you know, either you've been attacked or you're going to be attacked, versus offensively starting the attack yourself, carte blanche. And
so the declaration of war is almost voluntary if we're self-defending.
The declaration of war seems to be something that has two components. Number one, it declares the intention of the nation state, the intention being that we are now in a state of war. And our intention with you, with regard to you, is that we can attack you anywhere. And the other thing that it does is it makes it so that it's not so much tit for tat. You know, somebody shoots at you, you shoot back. This person's ready to strike, so you quickly take them out. It's not transactional anymore. It's not isolated to a specific transaction. It's broad scale. To hear that, let's play clip number 3.
Declarations of war have fallen out of fashion. The United States has only declared war 5 times. We've been involved in way more than 5 wars, but only 5 times. The War of 1812, Mexican War, Spanish War, World War I, and World War II. As far as I know, no country has declared war since the end of World War II. It's sort of gone out of fashion as a matter of international law.
So that was a guy from Columbia University, was it?
That's a professor, and he's talking about when declarations are used. I think the concept here is philosophically, what is a declaration? To some extent, one wants to say it's a bit of a formalism. I think of it as an English formalism, rather European formalism. Remember this, you used to have this thing about challenging someone to a duel, and that used to be popular in the, I challenge you to a duel. Declarations and challenging to duels are actually a very similar kind of thing. The strange thing about Hamilton's view thinks that all that the declaration is a status. So, for example, if someone bombs you, the status of war already exists, and you don't need a reciprocal declaration. That's not the way we've done it in the past. In World War II, when the country was bombed, they did a declaration of war and started the war. Under Hamilton's view, it's not clear that a declaration is needed in that situation when you get bombed. That's controversial. I'm not saying that that's what the law is. Really, what I'm trying to say is there are different views about this, all right? There are different views about this. In modern times, we don't really see declarations of war. We see something called a force authorization. Play clip number 5.
Instead, the more, I think a good substitute is statute or resolution. Congress can authorize the president to use military force. And those force authorizations are often very, very broad in scope. They're often phrased not just as the United States is at war with country X, but here's a threat that the United States is facing, and the president is authorized to use, let's say, all necessary and appropriate force or some such language in order to eradicate that threat.
So rather than using a declaration of war, you can get authorization to use force. Now, does war already have to be present?
You're asking these questions, and they're really intelligent, and they don't actually have an answer. We don't have a Supreme Court decision. What we have is a clause in the Constitution that's ambiguous, and what we're trying to deal with philosophically is what is a declaration and when is it needed. What I want you to understand is, if it's true, and it appears to be true, that the president has some limited shooting power in the Constitution under Article 2 by virtue of being commander-in-chief, then that's not a power that Congress could even itself take away. So, for example, if I'm commander-in-chief under Article 2 in the Constitution, then I have certain constitutional abilities that don't come from Congress giving them to me to do certain things with the troops, like, for example, put them in certain places. And if I put them in certain places and then people begin to attack them, I have a constitutional authority to begin to attack back. Now, this gets to be controversial because what generally happens is, because presidents have those kinds of powers, prerogative powers, they end up getting us into wars when there isn't an actual declaration or when there isn't an authorization. And so, for example, a lot of times what the United States has done is gotten an authorization for political reasons. In other words, if you go to war without an authorization, there's less political support for it. You know, a lot of times going to Congress isn't a legal decision, it's a decision involving politics. You know, one of the problems with Lyndon Johnson fighting the Vietnam War is he did not build a consensus for the war ahead of time. You know, if you're going to have a long war, you kind of want to have consensus for it, and getting an authorization is one way to do that. Let's listen to Tulsi Gabbard talk about mission creep.
We have men and women in harm's way today in these countries, and what purpose are they serving? Originally, it was that they needed to go and to to prevent another al-Qaeda insurgency and attack and threat to the United States, to defeat these terrorists that attacked us on 9/11. That's the congressional authorization that our troops are there for. But really what we're seeing now is that's not actually the case. Al-Qaeda is stronger, and it is becoming more clear that our troops are really there to fight against Iran. Once again, a war that Congress has not authorized. There has been no declaration of war.
Okay, so she's saying there's no declaration of war. Trump was out of bounds, according to Tulsi Gabbard. Now, was there an authorization of force?
Yeah, so here's the way this works. You know, the United States went off to war, and it went off to war after 9/11. It did some things in Afghanistan, and it eventually would do something in Iraq. And for both of those campaigns, there was an authorization to use military force. And when you pass a statute that authorizes that, it's still on the books. Okay, so it's still there. And so I, as commander-in-chief, can move the assets around, the Navy, the forces, pursuant to that statute, and put them in certain places. Now, if somebody starts to shoot at them, or if I have intelligence that somebody's going to shoot at them, I can shoot back. So once you do an authorization, it's very easy to see mission creep happen and to see wars spill over into other areas that you didn't think of.
That intelligence right there, that basically if somebody attacks your forces, or if you have intelligence that they will attack, that is what Trump used to take out their number 2 guy, General Soleimani.
Right, and you'll notice that, there's been a lot of assassinations that presidents have gotten into. You know, we got bin Laden, there had been several terrorists that President Obama got, and so President Trump is continuing along with that. I think Tulsi Gabbard's position is wrong. You don't need a declaration of war for this. But what we're trying to show you is something interesting, that there is this contest about who's got this power, who in the Constitution and the way that it's supposed to be allocated. The Congress is wanting to try to constrain the modern presidency from engaging in these campaigns and behaviors. And so you're hearing an interesting debate. To hear that, let's play clip number 28. This is Chuck Schumer.
Democrats on Capitol Hill continue to make the case that he must come to Congress first. President Trump told the Hill that, quote, "I do like keeping them abreast, but I don't have to do it legally." Now Democrats are trying to force the president's hand with an amendment that would require congressional approval for the use of military funds in Iran.
3 simple words: no unauthorized wars.
Who's the guy saying no unauthorized wars?
Okay, so that's Chuck Schumer. And what he wanted to do was try to make it so that Congress's spending power, Congress has control over the power of the purse. And he wanted to pass a resolution that would say that we wouldn't spend any money unless there was an authorization to do these sorts of things. And that did not pass. So again, certain Democrats don't like executive power, the modern executive power, where there's been, where you get mission creep and you get kind of dragged into war without there being a fourth force authorization. Let me give a few examples of this. One of the famous was FDR. The country did not want to go to war in World War II. And, the country didn't even want to go to war in World War I. We have this isolationist sentiment. World War II hasn't started yet for us. And Roosevelt wants to get us into the war. And one of the things he does is he positions ships, Navy ships, submarines, so that they're tracking Nazi subs, Nazi ships. And they're radioing the British. There they are. There they are. Go bomb them. There they are. Now that if you're on the German side, you'd say, "Oh my goodness gracious, you're interfering with this war that I'm having, so I'm going to shoot at you."
Is that what you mean by mission creep?
Well, yes. So what happened is they did start shooting at the American subs. And so what did Roosevelt do back? He issued a shoot on sight order. Whenever you see German ship, you shoot because
partaking in the war at that point. Right?
It was a shooting war, and that was regarded as lawful. Why was it lawful? It was lawful because Commander-in-Chief has constitutional power in Article 2, not given over from Congress, something Congress can't take away, the Article 2 power to move the assets around. And even though it was being moved around in a provocative way that would invite shooting upon you, once the shooting was upon you, you could shoot back. Now, here's the thing to remember, Adam, this is the big difference. You can't win World War II just by shooting at a few ships. You need to have a full-scale war. And so that's where the declaration came in. The declaration of war was sort of for the full-scale stuff, where these isolated strikes had to do with the president having some shooting power. This is what I'm trying to tell you. The president has some shooting power under the United States Constitution. Let me give you one more good example here is President Polk. Polk did something provocative. He basically started the war with Mexico in the 1800s. He put troops in lands that Mexico said was theirs. He put the troops right up there, basically, hoping that they'd get shot at. And once they were shot at, the troops could shoot back. And then Polk took the position, look, we're at war, so we have to go fight. Yeah. And so the Congress did then declare the war, but a lot of times Congress declares it because of political clamor. It's brought into it. So their declaration really was secondary in that situation. There's been all kinds of examples of where the United States has done something without an authorization. In 1900, McKinley sent troops to China, and Johnson sent troops to the Dominican Republic. Truman basically started the Korean War without a declaration.
All of these were without a declaration.
Right, without or an authorization. That's amazing there that the Korean War, that's a big war to start without any authorization. Think of Kennedy and the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis. There was all kinds of things that have been done without an authorization. So this is actually a very interesting topic. The one thing I do want to mention is the War Powers Act. Nixon did something interesting. Nixon was fighting Vietnam, and there was an authorization for that. And Nixon decided one day that he was going to start bombing the neighboring countries. He bombed Cambodia and Laos, I believe it's pronounced. And he did that because he thought that they were providing support to the Vietnamese forces we were fighting. And so he just started carpet bombing these neighboring countries, and there was never any authorization to do that. And this led Congress to say, we've had enough. And they passed something called the War Powers Act. And the War Powers Act is something that tries to limit the president's war-making authority. But in fact, it doesn't really. What the War Powers Act does is it makes the president notify Congress when some types of hostilities or shooting occur. For a while, we didn't even know that Nixon was bombing Cambodia. It was a secret. Back then they didn't have the internet and all that. They was bombing and we didn't know it for a while. And so you have to notify Congress that you're doing the bombing. The other thing is it requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing armed forces to military action and forbids armed forces from remaining for more than 60 days. So basically there's a 30 to 60 day period where the president gets to do stuff, gets to fight. And so in many ways, what the War Powers Act has done has given the president shooting power, not taken it away. And so whenever presidents need a convenient excuse, this is one that Trump just used, to do something, they say, oh, well, we're doing it under the War Powers Act. That's a convenient excuse for them. And whenever they feel constrained by the act, then they just simply violate it. For example, Clinton's war in Kosovo violated that act, and nothing happened.
How did it violate that? Was it outside of the time allotted?
Yes, it was outside of the time allotted without
force authorization.
Exactly. And so the question is, well, why doesn't the Supreme Court come in and decide this? Usually the lower courts have ruled that these are political questions. They won't get involved. And so what you basically have is an ambiguous situation. Congress has the power to declare a war. The president has the power to shoot, and nonetheless, in certain circumstances, that it has some shooting power. I would define the president's shooting power as kind of transactional, isolated, tit-for-tat kind of thing. I think that has always been there, but that can lead you into a much larger conflict, which then puts political pressure on the Congress to recognize it.
What happened to Clinton when he broke the War Powers Act?
Well, nothing happened to him. And there wasn't anything that happened to him. Reagan also violated the deadline with the troops in Lebanon. Let's do this. There's also the issue of controlling information. Let's play clip number 12.
Look, I understand Secretary Esper's point. I understand that not every piece of information can or pragmatically should be shared with all 535 members of Congress. But drive-by notification to 8 people is not the same as notification to Congress. Remember, there is an important constitutional reason for this. We have some overlap and some natural tension between the Article 2 Commander-in-Chief power enjoyed by the President and the Article 1, Section 8 war power that is possessed by Congress. In order to know and understand where one power ends and another begins in any context, We need to have a certain amount of information, and an adequate amount of information was not shared with us.
He's saying we the people, or there's not enough information getting to Congress.
Right, so think about this. How do you do this? The problem is the executives has all this information, Department of Defense, the Pentagon. You know, the executives got the National Security Agency. It's got all these bureaucracies. It knows what's going on in overseas and so forth, and whether the bombs landed, whether they didn't land, whether they're going to shoot, or what kind of intelligence they have. They're supposed to share that, not with Congress generally, because there'd be all kind of leaks. But you share it with what's called the Gang of Eight. It's like 8 congressmen who get briefed. And this particular congressman, who's Republican, was upset that the briefing that the Department of Defense gave over this recent action by Trump wasn't very good. And he's saying, look, how can we do our function if you won't share the information? And what's really interesting about it is that's all that Congress can do, is complain that you're not sharing the information. They're at an institutional disadvantage. And so this is actually a bit of a problem.
All right. To recap, how much power does the president have?
Here's what I think people should take from this. When Tulsi Gabbard is out there saying that you need a declaration of war for Trump or whomever to do this strike, that is not truthful. It is a philosophy, a theory about what she wants that Constitution to be. There's 2 different views about what people want this Constitution to be. Some people want for the Congress to really have the war power. And they will sit there and tell you that Congress has the war power. But the truth has been in this country, and frankly in the Constitution, that the president has inherent shooting power in Article 2. And because of the way they've used that in the past, they really have muscled Congress. They have a lot of more power than maybe they should. They control the information. The president has the ability to put troops in certain places where then if something should happen, that might drag us into something. And so we've seen that in the past where the president really has been the leader in this area when it comes to public policy that has war. I hate to talk about war as public policy, but when it comes to this option, the president really does have a little more power de facto than people understand. Maybe that should change. Maybe we should change it. Maybe we should try to amend the Constitution. Maybe we should make it more of an issue in presidential campaigns.
Recently in the news, I've heard that people are trying to limit the president's war-making abilities.
So that is a non-binding resolution. They are trying to do that. And what's interesting is they won't get enough votes for it. But even if it were to pass, it would be non-binding. And remember, they have already passed something called the War Powers Resolution, which was passed, signed into law in the 1970s. And that did not seem to limit the president's power. It seems rather to give the president more power. Analytically, there's a reason for that. A simple statute or act of Congress can't take away whatever shooting power comes from Article 2. The only thing that would stop that would be either an amendment, a new Supreme Court decision, or a president that wanted to be less aggressive. There'd be a political issue.
Those are 3 big changes that would have to happen.
One of the 3. You would have to get some big Supreme Court decision, which you're probably not going to get. You would have to amend the Constitution, which probably is not going to happen. Or you're going to get a president that is going to be a little more willing to share this power. And we have had that. But remember, every president, even President Clinton and President Obama, have had to do things using the executive power, using the power to shoot, where presidents take the lead. Presidents kind of de facto take the lead here. And that's just the way it is.
Very interesting stuff, Dr. Wilson. Very rich in history. All right. So after these few messages, we'll be back. Stay tuned.
Politics without allegiance. You're listening to Good Politics with Dr. Wilson and Adam Whiteman.